Hi, my name is Stephen Carter. I'm the head of the Afghanistan campaign at Global Witness. Global Witness is an organisation that works on issues of governance, corruption and natural resources around the world. Afghanistan is a fabulous case study for the sort of work we do, and it's an excellent illustration of the direct connection between governance and security in particular. And as part of that, the importance of institutions within that, within security. And it also illustrates what is really meant by institution building. So in Afghanistan, if you research the drivers of the insurgency and the drivers of instability, it is very clear that governance, in fact, justice, broadly speaking, has a very direct and substantial link to insecurity. And that is in a number of ways. So first of all, as a source of grievance, the unchecked abuses against local population from the government, from certain people who are associated with the government, and the lack of political representation of certain groups within the government, a sense of disenfranchisement, and the sense of a lack of access to economic opportunities. And then also, on the other side, a lack of justice is a reason for the weakness of the government itself. So unchecked corruption and impunity within government really undermines its capacity to fight the insurgency effectively, but also simply to deliver services to its own citizens. So if you look, for example, at the Taliban's own propaganda, the first element they talk about is usually the foreign occupation, the infidels who occupy Afghanistan, but the second thing is justice. And it's extremely notable that the services that they provide when they take over an area essentially boil down to providing a court service, which is swift, relatively neutral, and quite brutal, but is better in the eyes of many people than the very slow and often very corrupt justice that's provided by the government. So what's the point of all this? It's that there is a direct institutional link between those issues of justice and both the strength of the insurgency and the weakness of the government. And just one illustration of that is around natural resources, which is an area we specialise in. That natural resources are potentially a huge source of development and funding in Afghanistan. There's an estimate of somewhere between roughly $1 trillion and $3 trillion worth of minerals in Afghanistan, plus substantial oil and gas reserves. And so that's something which potentially could help drive development and could help to fund the government's own budget, which incidentally is hugely dependent on outside aid at the moment and entirely unsustainable in its current form. And yet you look at the natural resource sector and you see that in fact there's a much greater likelihood that it's going to be a source of conflict and corruption. There's actually going to do a net harm to Afghanistan because it helps to fund illegal armed groups. It's taken over by corrupt actors. It funds not just the insurgency but also militias which work in support of warlords within the government. And very little benefit actually goes either to the local people or to the Afghan government, much less than should. So strengthening governance around the natural resource sector is not a matter of morality or, it's not even simply a development issue. It's actually a national security issue for Afghanistan and by extension for any of the international partners that see an interest for their own security in the stability of Afghanistan. So that actually is not that controversial a point. And yet, when you look at the way in which the international community and the Afghan government have approached issues of justice, issues of institution building, it's been very much as second-order priorities. So they've been treated as a sort of, essentially sort of NGO issue, an order of, an issue which is not actually one of Dutch self-interest, but which is almost sort of one of charity. And you see that especially in the approach to the apolitical nature of the approach to institution building. So, for example, in the justice sector, the investment has been in building courthouses, been in sending people on training programs. In the anti-corruption effort, it's been the same thing. But what has been absolutely lacking is any political element to this. So any recognition that institution building, that the institutions are not just physical buildings, and it's not just about the personal capacity of the people involved. It's about norms. It's about expectations. It's about what are the rules that are actually enforced in order to create an environment of incentives and of expectations that people will operate within. Because Afghans, like everyone around the world, they're extremely rational people. They understand the environment they work in extremely well, and they respond to the incentives that are there. And yet you have senior generals within ISAF who will sit down and tell you in one breath that they understand that without corruption the counterinsurgency in Afghanistan is doomed, and yet in the next breath will tell you that they can't get involved in anything which becomes political. So as soon as they start pushing on corruption, as soon as they start actually compromising the interests of the powerful people who are involved in corruption, then they have to back off, because that immediately creates political heat, as one would expect, which in effect means you have an apolitical strategy, political strategy, which means that it's effectively useless. It's almost guaranteed to fail. And that is what needs to change. So we need a real shift in mentality so that issues of governance are seen as really core issues of security and by extension of self-interest for the international community, and that much stronger levers are used and much more political will is invested in that effort. That doesn't mean interfering in Afghanistan's sovereignty, but it does mean using the influence that the international community does have in a much more effective way. And for the Afghan government, it means treating the building up of those institutions as a higher priority. There has to be some balance. You can't take the political compromise entirely out of the picture, because Afghanistan has a lot of very powerful people who are involved in illicit activities in one way or another. But you can start to change the rules of the game and change the environment of incentives that people operate within in a very meaningful way by using the levers of money, of access to weapons and to military strength, of access to power. And that's the sort of the incentives that actually have a real impact on people's calculations. I think there's a very good opportunity now to have that sort of reform with a new Afghan government having recently taken office that seems to be very serious about reform. They're going to find it very difficult, but there are an enormous number of practical measures that can be taken which can help to, as I said, to change that universe of incentives. And so that's what we need to see, and that's what we're going to hopefully see happening not just in Afghanistan but around the world, is these issues of justice, of institution building, becoming integrated into development and into security planning in a way that is much more serious and comprehensive than we've seen so far.